everyone. Welcome to the VentureFuel Visionaries podcast. I'm Shira Averbuch, VP of Innovation and Partnerships at VentureFuel. In March of 2020, at the height of the COVID uncertainty, I got an email from Fred. He had an idea, a way of staying connected to our innovation ecosystem and current and prospective clients while we were all forced to work remotely. He wanted to launch a podcast about his favorite topic, corporate innovation. When we first launched the pod, I served as reviewer, editor, and promoter, putting together highlights from each episode and blasting out on our social channels. Although not originally part of my job description, it enabled me to digest and learn from the thought-provoking conversations Fred was having as podcast host. And now, 4 years later, I'm happy to report that I no longer serve as podcast producer, but I continue to use the podcast as my corporate innovation education. I can't believe we've hit 200 episodes, such a massive milestone, all from one little email. So to celebrate 200, I convinced Fred to take a break from talking to other people to share what he has learned over the past 4 years and what he hopes to accomplish with the next 200 episodes of the podcast. Please join me in welcoming Fred to the VentureFuel Visionaries podcast.
Sure, it is so fun to be on the other side. I don't have to do all the research and prep. And I remember, I often think about the fact that you get a lot of these emails from me that are like, hey, we should do this thing. And you must be like, oh, please, no more. But you're game for the podcast right away.
Hey, I love learning how to do new things. I do certainly get a lot of those emails from you, but that one I remember was a really fun one. So it is amazing to see how far we've come since that day 4 years ago. So to kick off our conversation, I wanted to start with the fact that obviously, Fred, you love corporate innovation. You study it, you take classes at Harvard, Columbia, MIT, and you're always reading the next book on it. So why launch a podcast? What were you hoping to accomplish?
It's funny. I had two thoughts on this. And one is like obviously basketball related because I always somehow bring it back to basketball. But when you think of like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan at like all-star games, right? Most of the people are just having fun and they're hanging out. And those guys were asking every other best player, how do you handle this situation? What's your move? What's your footwork like? What's that, right? They're like constant students of the game. And I always think that's the way you should be when you do something that you love, right? It's not even work, it's fun. And I do love taking all these executive education classes that are teaching corporates how to innovate, because I feel like I like to put myself in our clients' shoes constantly. But I realized that there were so many unique ways to approach corporate innovation. And what better way than to talk to the actual practitioners, right? Because as much as I love like academia and thinking like at that level of things, like our whole ethos of VentureFuel is like action and bias for action and tangible results. And so I wanted to go right to the source, who was in the field doing unique, interesting sort of corporate innovation models, frameworks, and to see what we could learn from them. And really also help amplify what they were doing, obviously. But it's really just trying to be a student of the game.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So then I have to ask, what did you learn? What was the biggest unlock for you?
Man, every week I learned something. It honestly, it came during the pandemic, right? The idea of this. And I was like, how are we going to even like talk to potential clients? I was like, oh, maybe they get on a podcast. And I didn't really think of the learning and development side of it. But every week I learn something new. Every guest has a different perspective or a different tweak on something. So it's hard to kind of say one thing. I will say what came to mind when you asked is this idea of beginning with the end in mind. I remember first reading that in like the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, that Stephen Covey book. But the best of our guests talk about the fact that they have an outcome that they're trying to achieve. They know their why. Why are they thinking about corporate innovation? And when they have that sort of North Star, like what success looks like, then they reverse engineer. So the program, there's all different levers you can pull in corporate innovation, whether you invest, whether you don't, whether it's early stage, late stage, in-house, external, open innovation, right? There's all these variables. But if you can kind of center on that North Star KPI, then you get to go back and look at all the different things that potentially could solve and deliver that outcome.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to start with the end in mind for sure. So speaking of all the different models and the words and the levers, What corporate innovation models most impressed you?
What's funny is I think the evolution of corporate innovation from what I will call startup petting zoo to tangible outcomes. And there are different models that deliver those outcomes. But I mean, the origin story of VentureFuel, actually, before I knew what a corporate accelerator was, before I knew that corporates wanted to work with startups, I was meeting with a very large CPG client with my old company, and they were like, "Oh, we can't meet tomorrow. All of our executives are flying to Silicon Valley to do like a startup day." And I just thought it was such an interesting idea. And they told me, 12 of them flew out. They spent several days there, and they came back. And I said, "Oh, great! Like, what are you going to do?" And they're like, "Well, there was one company we saw that was kind of interesting." And I was like, "Wow, that seems like a bad use of resources." And at the same time, I met a founder who essentially said, "I'm in this corporate accelerator." I was like, "What's an accelerator?" And he goes, "Oh, well, they took 6% equity in my business, and they're apparently going to open some doors for me." And I was like, "There's a better way to fuel your venture. Like, you need to go get commercial deals." And at the same time, I went back to the large CPG client. I'm like, "Isn't there like a way to get the best startups to come to you to solve the problems you're trying to solve? Like, make it more of a business, like professionalize it." And so that was sort of what the spark that started VentureFuel was, that sort of like aha moment of like, these are two people that should be dating and they're in the wrong bar, but they also like, they're not really being explicit about what the value is for each of them and not structuring things that way. And I think over the course of the podcast, but certainly in the 10 years VentureFuel has been around, is you've seen that evolution from startup petting zoo to like, how do we drive true commercial innovation that works for large companies that have to report results, right? They can't wait 10 years on a unicorn bet, right? So instead of moonshots, more jump shots. And I think there's a lot of different models that are getting there. But it's a really cool thing to see how this has gone from sort of like fluff to real results.
Yes, most definitely. So since you've been this podcast host for the last 200 episodes, you have a lot of experience asking questions. So I want to ask you, what question do you most often ask, and what have you learned from the answers to it?
Yeah, I totally stole this from a friend of mine, Taylor, who used to say, "Is the juice worth the squeeze?" And I always thought it was such a just succinct way to ask, why do this? If you're a large company and you're making tens of billions of dollars a year, you have the best engineers, you have the best researchers, best R&D department. Why even look outside of your own four walls? It seems like it's hard. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And it is awesome to get everyone's answer on that, because it's always slightly different, back to that sort of different outcomes and North Star KPIs. But I love that question because it's what they're being asked, right? Like at some point, some CEO or chief strategy officer or chief innovation officer is going to go, "All right, what's the outcome?" And so I always like to ask that, is the juice worth the squeeze? And it's been it's always eye-opening what they come back with. And corporate innovation has this tension between strategic and financial results and KPIs. So that question sort of unlocks how they view that world. So it's always a fun one to ask.
Yeah, definitely. Going off script a little here, but when you ask that question, have you ever stumped anyone and they haven't come up with an answer?
Yeah, for sure. You can tell right away when someone is kind of like, "Oh, well, I don't know. Like I got asked to do this," right? Like they hadn't quite thought it through in terms of like, what are the measurable outcomes? What's going to go into this? Is this value add? And those are usually the programs where you kind of look and go, "Ugh," they might be in trouble, right? Because we have a client of ours, Kristen Gendron, who said, which I always thought was brilliant. She goes, "There's no good time to get into corporate innovation, and there's no bad time." Meaning, when the results are unbelievable, people are, executives are like, "Why would we try something new and different? We should be doubling down on what's working." And when things go bad and the economy is hard, they're like, "We need to, retrench. Like we got to get back to what's working and just the fundamentals. So we can't do these new things." Right. So there's constant pressure on innovation because it's not immediate. And so if the person I'm interviewing does not know the answer to, is the juice worth the squeeze, that's usually something they should go work on, because they're going to get asked it, whether it's that day or down the road when things evolve or there's a change of leadership.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Kristen, one of our clients who's brilliant, and we have a number of our clients or other folks in this corporate startup kind of partnership world who are really fantastic, who join your podcast. So how have the guests evolved your view on corporate startup partnerships?
Ooh, I love that. I will say when I first started this, I assumed there was a right answer. I assumed there was a framework that if I could just uncork it, uncrack it, right? Find one little piece here, that it would just be a repeatable framework we could use with every corporate client. And what I've realized from VentureFuel and on the podcast is there's a lot of different frameworks, and there are multiple right answers. And what works for company A doesn't work for company B for a variety of reasons. And so I think while it would be very easy to say, this is the way to do it, we always do it this way, and this is the framework, right? Very like, here's the 2x2 on how to do this. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. These are fluid, alive organizations, both the big companies and the startups, that have different needs at different times, different KPIs. Some need to move fast, some need to move slow. And I think that recognizing that there is no magic bullet, there's no sort of like, this is the way it must be done. Certainly, having done this for a long time and listening to people, there are best practices and there are ways of doing things similarly that lead to better results. But having that knowledge that multiple frameworks might solve for the challenge, and being willing to think about that. We've seen venture studios, corporate accelerators, open innovation, closed innovation, incubators, right? There are all these different ways to approach things and variables within each of those. And so I think really the exercise of thinking through, what are you actually trying to achieve? Why are you doing this? Thinking about, is the juice worth the squeeze? And then building something that is right for your organization is sort of a big eye-opener for me, that there was no perfect model out there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm hearing you talk about how all those steps from the previous questions, how all those come together. So identifying the goal, is the juice worth the squeeze, and then the levers or the frameworks to put them together. I actually just bought a book of 50 frameworks, talk about 2x2s, but the idea that it can point you in the direction of which one you need at any given point in time is really compelling. Okay, so we've gotten
I think the best, sorry, just to go off that, like I think with most of our clients, right, they kind of come into it and say, no, I think we're going to do X. This looks good to us. And it's like, yes, and, right? So the framework, usually there are frameworks that can be applied. They get you most of the way there, but then you need to iterate and customize based on what the outcome is that they want. So I love frameworks. We certainly have several of our own, and we're always thinking about them and ways to do things, just because it makes the process part easier for our clients. But the truth is, like, you've got to be able to stay within the guidelines, but color outside the lines, right? Like there's some magic in thinking a little bit more creatively to build the right program for the right client at the right time.
Totally. And I will say some of my favorite kind of case studies from the past 4 years have been those clients that we've worked with. And each year we see that evolution. So bringing in some of those creative components, adjusting the way that we're operating. And it's through understanding what they need, seeing it executed in one version, and then building and refining as we go. And so that's talk about the last 4 years and 200 episodes. We've also had a lot of learnings from those clients that we've worked with year over year over the past 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so we've gotten to a part of this episode where we do some rapid fire questions. I always enjoy this when I hear you ask these and you have the guests kind of answering quickly on a variety of fun topics. Some of which, by the way, they don't end up answering that quickly because they can be challenging topics. But here's your turn, Fred. We're going to turn the tables on you, and I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions. So are you ready?
Let's go. I love it.
Okay. Who was your favorite guest on the podcast?
Oh, that one stinks. Truly all of them. I know everyone says stuff like that, but I learned something from every single guest, and it's so fun. But I will dodge the question. I'll give you two. Really early on, Raja Manar, who's the CMO at Mastercard. He came on, it was like the first 3 or 4 episodes, And we talked about sonic branding. And he started off the episode basically saying advertising is dead. And this is the CMO of one of the largest advertising companies in the world. And we talked about sound and how that was going to be the evolution of advertising, that it would be more sort of intrinsic. And it was just a fascinating conversation that made me think differently. And then I'll give one other, which was Vicky Dobbs-Beck, who's at Lucasfilms. And we were talking about extended realities, mixed reality and augmented reality. And she talked about making eye contact with Darth Vadar. And she was like, I just want to have a personal relationship with Darth Vadar. And that must have been 2 or 3 years ago at this point, that conversation. And I think about it anytime anyone pitches me anything that is about new realities, I'm like, oh, like having a personal relationship with Darth Vadar. So those two kind of come to mind, but I really do. I'll give you one more. We sometimes have startup founders on the show. And we had a company called Resembled.ai, which Comcast has gone on to invest in. Comcast Ventures did. But they cloned my voice. And part of me was like, oh, that'd be cool. Maybe I could get the intros done, with this cloning device. But that whole process was really fun, and it was very advanced AI at the time. And now it's gone on to grow to be a very interesting company. So they were a fun one also.
Yeah, if I were still helping to edit and produce this podcast, I would definitely be looking at using AI for some of these pieces. So that is a very cool example.
I actually found it pretty cool. I found a cool startup on that line that essentially will listen to your episode for you, chop up notes for social media, as well as pull out insights. And it's pretty cool. It's called Clipped. I believe that's what it's called. But yeah, there's a lot of things happening on the AI space that could be used for podcasters out there. Yeah,
I love that. Okay, next up, you love to name things. Tell me your favorite title of a podcast episode.
Yeah, so my sister jokes that every episode is named the future of something. She's like, oh, what is it this week? Future of milk, future of basketball, future of whatever. So I get a lot of slack for using future of too much. But I do like the titles of the show. That's a fun part for me. A couple that jump to mind, Stanley Black & Decker had scaling simplicity. I loved how tight those two words, and it was everything, right? Like how do you create something that's simple and then make it big? I thought that was a really cool one. We have one that hasn't been released yet, called the phrase corporate clienting. And so instead of corporate venture capital, it was the idea of corporates being the first client of a startup. I thought that was a great idea and something very close to how we think about how corporates and startups should work together. And lastly, I thought one that was really interesting, it was from LG, was external innovation for internal stakeholders. Because I think what a lot of people don't think about is the juice worth the squeeze, right? And so this was sort of a conversation about how do you get the internal stakeholders to buy into the potential of working with external partners. So I thought that was a pretty cool one. Yeah,
so I'm seeing some themes of alliteration in the titles, but also just like punchy use of different phrases. I like that.
I always joke that I want to name, like, I wish I could spend the time to make every title like the name of a song, right? So it's like, what's your album? What's your song? So we try and keep them tight and fun and interesting.
Yeah. Next up, best quote from the podcast.
Oh, best quote. I would say that disruption insurance. And it's not really a quote, but it kind of came up organically in a conversation with AFWorks, which was an awesome conversation about government, private, venture capital, startups, how they all kind of work together. And we were talking about the value of working with startups. Like, why do you do it? And we we're talking about growth. And then I said disruption insurance. That seems so self-centered that I'm going to give you my favorite quote is from myself. But that's all right. I'll do it since I started that route. But I kind of set it offhandishly, and you can hear on the episode our guests kind of be like, "Wow, that's a big concept," and it's something we've thought about a lot. Is that for a lot of large companies, that's what this is a way to insure for the future, whether it's future proofing or disruption insurance, and it's a low cost way today to protect the future of the business, which is what insurance is. So I thought it was a really cool idea that we sort of came up with together on the show talking, and we've run with a little bit since then.
Yeah, love that, disruption insurance. And the last question here is similar in the sense of like naming things, but sometimes when we explain what we do, we need to have an analogy or a story to go along with it. It helps people frame what we're talking about. So what is the best analogy or story that's come out of the pod?
TDK Ventures, pretty recent episode, talked about this idea of the value of external innovation. And the idea is sort of like at the base of a mountain, right? You have all your competitors and you're all just fighting to get up the mountain together. You have the same equipment, the same training. So you're eking out 1%, 0.5%, 3% growth on top of whatever your competitors are doing, right? You're really in like the muck hand to hand. Think of like people running up a snowy mountain. They can only go so fast. They might have better shoes, right? Which gives them an advantage, but then the other team gets better shoes. So he's kind of really painting this picture of this, like everybody, the competitors are all trying to get there. And then all of a sudden you have this little tiny helicopter that can just go up and fly above the clouds and just see what it looks like up ahead. And it's all like the top of a mountain, right? There's no path, there's no ski slope, there's no trail or anything. But you see these individual people, little startups, trying different paths. They're just trying things. And so you're able as an external innovation to go up there and look and say, oh, this is interesting. And you can call back down to the mothership and say, hey, turn left. There's an interesting opportunity for us to go explore, or turn right, or send me a couple guys or girls, and we're going to go up there with this crew, and we're going to try and see if this is real. And I thought it was such a cool way to think about that sort of like the cloud cover of not being able to see into the future, and that you have these like really trailblazing entrepreneur explorers up there trying things very dangerously, right? And you can go and support them and encourage them, learn with them, and then that's going to give you that opportunity to find the faster path up.
Yeah, it's almost like I have that vision of the helicopter where they drop down the ladder to those that they want to kind of climb up and participate in something with. So I definitely like that visual there. Very cool.
Yeah, I don't know why. I have the ladder too, but like the ladder had like an oxygen tank and like a bowl of like soup or something, and it was like, hey, keep going. Like, or here's some skis or walking sticks or something. Like, it wasn't that they were taking the startup out of the challenge, right? It was almost like, hey, we're gonna support you to get to the top and keep going. We got you, and like you're safe, right? Like basically, like don't worry, we're here. We can come get you with that ladder if we need to. So keep going, and we want you to keep taking chances and find new things.
Yeah, that's such a great kind of play off of that, because it's truly fantastic to see how these two sides of an equation, the corporate and the startup, can really benefit each other and work together in that sense. And so there's so much value on both sides of this equation.
I agree.
So feels like we have to keep this thing going, right? We've done 200 episodes. They've been fantastic. Talked to so many great people. So maybe we're on to 500 episodes next, who knows? But from your perspective, Fred, what's next for the pod?
Yeah, I mean, it's something I really thought was just going to be a quick, we'd do it for a couple months and move on to something else. But it is the greatest hack I've ever found. For me personally, is I get to learn every week with a new guest. So there's no reason why we're not going to keep going with it. And I think what's cool is this is a space where people can innovate and try new things and exploring new models. And so we want to bring them on the show to learn from them, to amplify what they're doing, to explore it. So anyone listening that is trying something new and different in corporate innovation is welcome to be on the show. We'd love to have them. And I think by exploring all these things, we can start to find more value for our clients, future clients, our listeners. So yeah, the plan is to keep going. And it's always so fun for me. And we never have a shortage of people that are trying something new and different. So it feels like a pretty natural conversation to have with folks, and it's really fun to do.
Yeah, well, I'll say from my standpoint, thank you for the education that this podcast has provided to me and others over the past 4 years and for asking the tough questions and the fun questions. It's been a pleasure to listen over time. So thanks, Fred.
Oh yeah, totally. It's please don't thank me. I mean, I have to thank you for helping getting off the ground early days and editing all these things. I'm sure the last thing you want is to hear my voice in your ear talking to somebody else. So thank you for everything you've done, and to everybody behind the scenes on the VentureFuel team, from our producers to our editors to our marketing team to the folks getting guests. It's pretty cool. It's gotten to the point where I just kind of get to show up and talk and learn. And so it's become very fun and easy from my standpoint, but there's a lot of work that goes into it on the back end. So, we don't get to thank everybody that works on this frequently. And so I'd like to do that because they're the ones that make this thing fun and smooth. And of course, the last thing I would do is thank each of the guests. They're taking time out of their very busy days. Either they're venture capitalists, they're corporate innovators, or they're startup founders. The one thing none of those three things have is time. So for them to take time to share how they're approaching the world, what they're doing differently, what's unique, is really special and means a lot to me personally, as well as I think to all the listeners, because I just ask the questions. There's no need to thank me. It's more about learning from all of them. So it's been a lot of fun. It's really special, and I can't wait to keep it going.
Yes. So on to 500.
All right. Before we go, Shira, I have a question for you. What's one thing you learned from the podcast?
Ooh, putting me on the spot. So I actually have to answer this two ways. The first thing I learned happened back in 2020 when you sent me that email, and I had to figure out how to execute a podcast. So I think I learned in that not only how to do it, how to edit these things and get them out into the world, but I learned the confidence that I and many of the people on our team can figure out how to do new things. And so I've taken that with me this whole time. But in listening to all of the episodes, I don't know if I've listened to all 200, but close. I would say what I learned is similar to what you described through the questions today, which is that there is no one true solution for corporate innovation. There are many different ways to approach it. But what I learned is that there's so many smart people and great organizations who continue to think about this, despite risks associated with new ventures, or despite whatever economic environment we're in, which has certainly changed over the last 4 years, ups and downs. Is that it's really critically important for large companies to continue pushing forward in this space, and that there continue to be, again, despite any risk or anything going on in the world, there continue to be startups and founders who are so committed to solving some of these really big, meaty challenges. And so in listening to all those discussions, I know that there's so much more to know and there's so much more to test, but that people will continue pushing forward in this space regardless of what's going on. And so I love to continue to hear that come through in each of the podcast episodes.
I love it. I have to say, to your point of navigating something new and different, I'll give a shout out to Laura Plunkett from Comcast, right? It's FIO, figure it out.
Exactly.
There's a tremendous amount of that in her organization of okay, let's go figure this thing out. When you were talking, what jumped to me too that we didn't really talk about was when I asked people, is the juice worth the squeeze? I had this amazing answer once. I think it was TDK Ventures, but this answer has happened a few times in different ways. But I basically said, hey, look, there's no good time for corporate innovation. Things are good. Everyone wants to double down on what's good. Things are bad. Everyone wants to retrench. I was like, how can you afford to do corporate innovation? And he just stopped and he goes, how can you afford not to?
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought it was such an awesome, everything's moving so fast right now. And so you need to go figure it out. You have to get out there. You have to try things. You need to go outside your own four walls to find, unleash the innovators, those folks that are out there trying new things, because there's magic, right? What a corporate wants and what a startup wants are so adjacent and connect perfectly, right? They're not stepping on each other's toes, and they both have strengths and weaknesses that match up so nicely. So I love how you put it, right? It's what are the challenges out there, and then go start on third base. Find those startup founders that are out there innovating in this thing that is their everything, and is one of your 100 things. If you're a corporate, like why not get the person that cares the most in the world about that thing, bring them in, help them scale, help them achieve their dreams, and help you achieve your objectives.
Yeah, truly start on.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, truly starting on third base, but we have to figure out a different sports analogy for that. Maybe one in soccer. I'll work on that for you.
Yeah, what is the soccer analogy? You got it.
I don't know. Start in the attacking third, maybe.
Yeah, see, nobody knows what that means. Like we're in trouble. Like we need more generic examples. Anyway, Shira, thank you for flipping this around. It's fun to be the guest. Maybe that's what we'll do for the next 200 episodes.
Maybe. Thanks, Fred.